Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant. Joining me is my permanent guest, Cammy. Hello, Cammy.
Hello, Bryant.
How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's still the end of the world.
Yeah.
Um, so we're here with Mystery. This is a podcast that Cammy and I came up with, coming up on a year now, almost. A couple, like 2 months away, right? We,
Yeah, September will make it a year, I think.
I think it's the end of August, actually. I'm pretty
Oh,
sure.
really? Okay,
hmm
yeah. Well, I think at least we started recording in August because we
That's
didn't put it
true.
up immediately. Yeah.
That's true. And if you're just joining us, this is a podcast that likes to find myths and relevant stories, history, what have you, and we want to present a little bit of that story to you and then kind of talk about the history or the facts behind that. Today we have a really cool myth. We've touched a lot of Greek and a good amount of Norse mythology, but this is sort of a nice branch that we're getting into. Do you see what I did there, Cammy?
A branch of the world tree. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, yeah. We're going to talk about I specifically Yggdrasil, the Norse, and Germanic. I mean, it goes a lot. We'll talk about that too, but more commonly associated with Norse mythology. But it's also going to touch into some of the other mythologies. The world tree is what we call a mytheme, not a myth meme, but a mytheme, which is sort of a relevant theme across different religions and mythologies. So, Cammy, why don't you start us up with your tale?
Sure. I am talking a little bit about the the Norse, like Bryant said, and then I'm also going into the Slavic tales as well. I
Awesome.
used the prose and poetic Eddas for the Norse stuff.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, there's not a primary source for the Slavic stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
So I used cs.mcgill.ca, which is McGill University's website, uh, and it was just titled Slavic World Tree. And then rodnovery.ru, Slavic Pagan World, and it's by Gary Green. So he did like a compilation of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah. Which actually, if anybody can look, if anybody's interested in Slavic stuff, that is a really nice like PDF format of just a lot of information on Slavic myths. So if you're interested and can't find a primary source because it doesn't exist, then I would definitely go there.
Yeah.
So, according to Norse mythology, the great ash, Yggdrasil, is the most sacred place to the gods. The towering branches make their way to heaven, even surpassing it. The entire world lies beneath their canopy. The ash has three taproots. One reaches the. How did we say that? How did you tell me to say this? Asir?
Acer.
Or Acer, yeah.
Yeah.
So one reaches the Acer, one reaches the Frost Giants, and the third Niflheim. Below its roots, supplying the nourishment of water on this is under the Aesir, Hugelnir
hmm
exists, so that's a spring. And Nidhugg, the terrible serpent, eats at the root from the spring. Mimir, the well of knowledge, feeds a second root from the land of the frost giants. Even Odin did not get to partake in this pleasure without sacrifice. He left his eye as a token to the well. And the third root is nourished through the heavenly fountain of Erd, which I looked into a little bit to Erd, and it's sort of represents the past. So it's fed by
Yes.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
past.
I'll
Yeah.
be talking about that too soon.
Good, because apparently I just stopped there and didn't go any further. All right, so on to the Slavic stuff. In the Slavic world, the great tree was an oak. While there are no real direct sources like the Prose Edda for the world tree, we did see the motif again and again in Slavic art. The tree existed in three parts, just like in Norse mythology. The canopy of the tree was the sky, where the heavens and the gods existed. The trunk was the earth, where the humans lived. The roots were the underworld. Unlike how the Christian world represents the world below, Slavs believed the underworld to be a lush green place. It was always spring there. There's a bit of a creation story that explains how the Slavs saw their world in relation to the heavens and the underworld. And it does go a little bit into the tree too, so I decided to put this in there. Essentially, God and his shadow existed. So did the world tree and the sea, but nothing else. At the bottom of the sea there was sand. God wanted to create land so he could have a place to sit with his only other being his shadow. In some stories, the devil is the shadow of God. So this was like later Christian stories. So God sends his shadow to the bottom of the sea to find the sand. The shadow finds the sand and returns to the surface and hands it to God. God then sprinkles the sand about them and creates the earth. After this, both slept, but the shadow had very little room, so he pushed God off the land. Instead of falling into the water, God made more land as he rolled. When he awoke, he realized what his shadow had done. This made God angry, and he walked away from his shadow. Everywhere he stepped, there was more land. The shadow became worried that the land would become too vast, so he pleaded with God, who made a cross upon the earth, creating the four directions and stopping the growth of the land. So that's the end of the story and pretty much the end of what I've written.
Okay.
But from what I read, so there was one idea of, the canopy, heaven being like kind of how we would see it, like above
Yeah.
earth, earth below that, and then the underworld below that.
Yeah.
But there's also this idea that sort of earth and heaven exist on this plane, and there's this vast ocean, and then beyond that is the underworld. So it's
Oh,
almost a
cool.
flat place.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the whole universe is kind of flat or whatever. So those are the stories I have. What do you have, Bryant?
Flat universe theory now.
Yeah, well, the earth is hollow and the universe is flat, apparently.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. That's really cool. So Yggdrasil is cool. I have this like fun, vague memory in my brain of I think I was in middle school and I was scouring through Wikipedia, and I think like Yggdrasil was sort of the beginning of it. It was like my Norse 101. I remember starting to look into it all, into Norse mythology, and I remember starting with Yggdrasil, and so well that Wikipedia page has definitely been updated since then, and is much more reliable. Um,
It
so
was like
yeah,
4 sentences
I
before.
know, yeah, and like I think it said like Ben and Jerry's made Yggdrasil. No, I'm just kidding. So what's really cool, what I found out now about Yggdrasil that I didn't know before this podcast was that the name Yggdrasil is really interesting. I didn't know the origin of the name, and what it is Yggdrasil is spelled a little funky, like a lot of these words. It's Yggdrasil. So, but it's a combination of two words. So Igor, Yggr, is actually another name for Odin, who goes by
Okay.
lots of different names, but usually you'll see him as like Odin or Woden or Wotan. But Igor is another name for Odin, and Drasil, it essentially means horse. I've seen that it could also mean like step and things like that, but it essentially means horse. So in a way, it kind of means Odin's horse, but there's a lot on that there. An important thing connection with Odin and the tree is that Odin hung himself from the tree, and I believe he was like speared too. It's very like Christ-like in a lot of ways.
Wait, is that like at the end of the world or
No, this is just one of the things that happened.
okay.
Odin wanted to gain vast knowledge, and to do so, he hung himself for several days, and he also sacrificed an eye. So a lot of self punishment just to get some knowledge. And so Yggdrasil is an ash tree, which has like a bit of there's a lot there. One source I have kind of connects Yggdrasil and ash trees in with the winter solstice and bringing in trees and things like that, which I do believe that is a Nordic thing. I didn't go too much into that. That's a mystery podcast on its own. But yes, Odin, it's sort of like Odin's tree, and there's a lot there. It's very contested, the name, the meaning of the name, but there's a big connection there between Odin and the act of him hanging himself on the tree and the way we call it. So like in a way, even though it's called like Drasil means horse or step, it kind of means like the transportation, like Odin's mobility, and it's sort of a metaphysical sort of mobility here. So
Okay.
right, and Yggdrasil is very important because it connects the 9 realms. I won't name them all, but you kind of mentioned like Niflheim is one. Midgard is our realm, Earth. Asgard is where the Aesir reside, and the tree, its roots connects all of the realms together, and it's very important because Yggdrasil, it will be damaged during Ragnarok, but it is said it'll still be there, and it's going to be one of the ways that life kind of regrows. Which we talked about Ragnarok, and interestingly, I don't think we even really talked about Yggdrasil in our episode. I remember we
No,
talked
we
about.
didn't at all.
Right, yeah, and that's I remember too looking into I focused on Balder during that episode, and he's going to survive and sort of be there. He's very like Christ-like in a lot of ways too. But one cool thing is from the ash tree, there's like a part of it where these two beings, Asker and Embla, will be basically the first man and woman to repopulate. So very Adam and Evie kind of thing going on
Hmm.
with Yggdrasil being, and if you go from Tree of Knowledge and think going on from there, there's a lot of connections here. The references, as you mentioned, do come from the Prose and Poetic Edda, which was written by Snorri Sturluson in medieval Europe, and it's interesting because that's really it. Norse mythology goes back to ancient times, and it never was written down. That's what the Latins and the Greeks really had ahead of everyone, was they decided to start writing everything down and they really like cherished the chronicling of things, and that's why it's so well studied. Norse mythology, which really extends to a huge area, Slavic, as we mentioned, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, it really, if you kind of like look at a map, look at Norway, and then just kind of go down, that's all these stories really encompass. And we've mentioned the Slavic peoples, and there are a lot of parallels between Slavic mythology and Norse mythology. But the Slavic area, like what you can kind of say is a mixture of the Balkans, but it kind of goes even further. Balkans, Russia, Asia Minor, tons of areas were covered by these people, and the Slavic peoples are just as diverse. There's Islamic Slavic peoples, there's heavily Catholic, heavily Orthodox, and so on. But they all have these sort of roots. Again, I'm going to keep using that pun into the Slavic mythology. And there's a really cool page on Slavic paganism, and we actually do plan on revisiting it. There's some cool beings and entities. They do have like a sort of hierarchy. It's very similar to Norse mythology in a lot of ways, and we'll be touching on that in some future episodes. But yes, they do hold the oak tree as a sacred tree. I didn't see, sadly, as you mentioned, if Norse mythology has barely any sources, Slavic mythology has even less or fewer. So it sucks because we don't even really have like a poetic or prose Edda where someone in the 12th century who was Latinized, educated wise, and was like, I should write this down. Sadly, it doesn't seem like much of that happened for the Slavic peoples. Although,
Yeah, one thing I noticed
sure,
is the sources that did exist were Christian sources,
yeah, I
and
don't know if you
so you
ran.
don't know how much influence that had on what was actually written.
Exactly. Yeah. There's one book that I didn't really use it, but I found there's this book called the Chronica Slavorum, which is Chronicle of the Slavs. It was written by a Anglo-Saxon priest and historian in the 12th century. And so who knows what his motive. I didn't see anything of it. I've just seen it. But who knows what it's going to be. But there's a few other sources, but they're all going to be in the medieval period. And so this is going to be the post sort of the beginnings of the Christianization of this area. So yeah, we don't know how much of Norse mythology was influenced by Christianity when it was written down. And so the Slavic paganism and mythology could have kind of gone under the same sort of thing.
You know what's really interesting to me when
Sure.
I was reading it? The idea, and we did an episode on Strigoi before, but that is so prevalent, and that came from kind of that area of the world and those people. And but that's like one of the great myths that we have is the vampire, and that came from that area. But we don't have really anything else.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. So yeah, like the world tree concept and just trees and religion, we've talked about Yggdrasil and the oak tree for the Nordics, but it's very prominent. What's cool is, so like I talked about Asia Minor and the Anatolian Peninsula, and if you kind of go further east into like Mongol, Siberian, Turkic areas, North Asia, it's very prevalent in those cultures too. And they had a big mix of their own sort of paganism, I guess you could say. That was really, so the Turkic peoples, especially before they sort of became Islamic, and the Mongols, they had very think like shamanistic, like there's Tengranism, an ancient religion, and a few other religions and mythologies in this area, and they all really hold trees in a specific trees, whether it's an oak or an ash, in a really high light. And even you could even trace it to Rome and Greek, especially with Greek. Is it the Moriai, the olive tree, which is closely associated.
Yeah, that was a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, Athena. It has close connections with Athena, and in Roman mythology as well. There's sort of I was looking at. Let me see. They also, of course, believe that the olive tree is important. Ancient fig tree in the Comitium at Rome, which has connections to the tree which Romulus and Remus founded the empire and things like that. So there are really cool connections there. I'll mention before I forget too, because you mentioned the time, the past, and that's a big thing for Norse mythology because of the Norns, which are the Fates, and they each represent the past, present, and future, which they are named after. And so the Norns sit at the base of the trunk of Yggdrasil, and they sort of act as they control time in a way. I think it's more like that they're sort of like Hades, where I think they get a bad rap, but really they're just making sure the wheels keep moving, you know?
You know what it reminded me of?
Yeah.
The triad of women that weave your fate.
Yeah,
and then they cut it off.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what it reminded me of.
Yeah, no,
is it women or it's men?
It is women. It is specifically women.
Is there like a crone and a maiden and a matron?
No, I don't think they. I haven't looked at it too much. Like Snorri Sturluson talks about them, and like I said, I don't think that they're powerful maiden. I believe that they're Jotuns, they're giants. But of course, remember, giant here doesn't necessarily mean you're huge. It just means that you're of the race of giants. And so they just have a connection, a mythological connection here. And one represents the past, present, and future. And that's really it. Yeah, that's kind of it. I don't think that they can be essentially pleased or upset. Like I said, I think they just sort of make sure
they don't
things
try
go.
to change fate, or you can't like make them change your fate. It just happens the way it's supposed to, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's really cool. it's nice. Like if you think of Hercules and the Fates cutting and sharing that eye, that like they all have this sort of they're very evil almost, you know. But here they're just maidens, just giant Jotun maidens that are just making sure things go. And Yggdrasil is a really complicated place too. There's like a goat and a deer that live there and eat off the tree, but also provide it with water. And there's a squirrel apparently that's running around infinitely. And
I saw that, but I did not
yeah,
understand it. I was like,
um,
okay, I'm not even gonna.
right. I know. And there's a dragon that's sucking out blood from people, and there's a
Yeah,
lot.
that's the
Nidhogg. Yeah,
Nidhogg.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
said it wrong earlier.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, he
It's
like
got a ton
chews
of
the root or
pronunciations.
whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of cool stuff. Yggdrasil is a very complicated place, but it's got some really cool things going on, and just we're sort of we're limited by the source material that we have, but there is a lot there that we can add to the tree. But certainly as well, there's a lot of different world tree and religious mythological tree myths that we can sort of explore as well. But this is hopefully a little primer for all things wood and
Yeah,
mythology.
this myth was more prevalent than the world turtle, which was the other
Yeah.
one that we saw. And it wasn't there like a tree on the back of a turtle in some of the imagery?
Yes.
I feel
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
saw that. Okay.
For sure. For sure. I've seen that for sure. For sure. So, yeah, this is it's really cool, and I think I really like with the Norse, especially too, when you kind of get into the specifics of Yggdrasil. It puts in the man and woman that were born from it to give life to the human race, essentially, and kind of like I said, I think we can easily our next we did a Yule episode. Our next episode that's Christmas themed could easily be the Christmas tree, and we can kind of revisit some of this stuff. So, well, Cammy, thank you so much for kind of introing us to Yggdrasil and especially Slavic culture. There's a lot to unpack there, and hopefully we'll be able to in the next few months. But I really appreciate your jab at it all.
Yeah, thank you for knowing how to pronounce everything.
Yeah, I'm trying. Who knows if I really am, but it's funny. I'll before we end, I'll make a video game reference. The mobile game Fire Emblem Heroes, based off of the strategy RPGs, it's all based off of Norse mythology. They or the names. So like the main heroes come from the kingdom of Asker, and the main villains come from the kingdom of Embla, and the villains all come from different realms, like Muspelheim, the realm of like fire, and Hell, which Hel. So they use all these things, and it's really cool because the whole point of the game is to summon heroes, or is for you to put your credit card number in, so that way you can summon lots of heroes that from all of the games. But all of the games span like 20 years, and they're not all connected. So they had to kind of like bring the story to make sense of why are these heroes coming, traveling interdimensionally. Well, it's because Yggdrasil is connecting all these realms and it's summoning them, that sort of thing. So it's a cool video game interpretation of using Yggdrasil, connecting these realms together in order to get your mom's credit card number. So anyway, well, Cammy, thanks again. Everyone, thanks for listening with us. We really appreciate your feedback. Mythstorie with an IE at gmail.com is a great way to get in touch with us. But we also have a Facebook group, and we're now on YouTube as well. So feel free to jump on there. You can watch the videos. It's just a still video right now, but feel free to watch and like whatever way you like to listen to the podcast. Just let us know what you think, and we'll be happy to take in your constructive criticism. So thanks again, guys. Take care.